Good to go? Thank you all for being here. The District Attorney's Office has made a decision this year to do a weekly press conference on Mondays. The only week, with the exception of certain holidays, we'll be doing it every Monday around this time. We'll be doing some of them in the office and some of them in other locations, such as this beautiful masjid. The format for the press conference today will be similar to the press conferences that we are going to have on other weeks. And that is that we will provide an update in relation to what's going on with criminal issues, for example, gun violence. We expect that to be a major emphasis this year. And then we will also be explaining the work that is done by one of the units within the DA's office. Today it's going to be the Private Criminal Complaint Unit, because we believe in actually stopping crimes from happening as opposed to simply responding when they do. We are hoping to present some of the people in the community who do incredibly important work that goes towards prevention, that goes towards preventing there being a next victim of a particular type of crime. And we are honored to have the opportunity to do that today. So while we will be talking about prosecution, and we have on site our Chief of Homicide, Chesley Lightsey, who is available to answer any questions that you may have. We also have Jim Delafiora, who's the Chief of our Private Criminal Complaint Unit, here to answer questions and speak on that aspect of it. We are also delighted to have representation for Northwest Victim Services with the unstoppable Melanie Nelson. We're delighted to have Joseph Budd, who will be explaining to you the incredibly important work his organization does, MWCOG. And we will have the faith community represented, because the truth is, without the faith community, there's very little that we can get done. First, it will be Imam Idris Abdul Zahir, whose Masjidullah this is, and then it will be Dr. Kevin Johnson of the Dare to Imagine Church, which at this point is a growing congregation of about 1,000 people, quite close to where we are now. So let me turn first and briefly to speaking to issues around gun violence. Obviously, we have heard one heartbreaking story after another in the last week having to do with the killings of our fellow Philadelphians. Let me say, first of all, that my office remains extremely committed to fairly prosecuting gun-related cases in Philadelphia. We have assigned 12 different assistant district attorneys to police detective divisions across the city. It's the first time that's happened in the history of the city, where they are accepting the invitation of the police department to assist in shooting investigations for the first time in the history of those two criminal justice partners. We are assisting in carefully trying to identify, investigate, and prosecute drivers of gun violence in Philadelphia. And the statistics show that right before the pandemic, our rate of conviction for homicides and shootings was 85%. It was actually the highest that it had been over the prior 5 years. So let me just be clear to anyone who's thinking of picking up a gun, carrying a gun illegally, using that gun. My staff and I are not going to tolerate babies, young people, women, and men in communities being victimized by your choice to pick up a gun and shoot it at someone. We understand that many young people feel trapped in a life of crime, but there are things that can be done about it, and we can help you do those things to get you out of that life. If you pick up a gun illegally, if you use that gun illegally, you will be prosecuted. There is an accounting due when you injure another human being and you terrify a neighborhood. There is an accounting due. And my office is going to make sure that that accounting is paid. If you're involved in group violence and you promote violence on social media, let me be clear. We are watching, and you will be prosecuted. For those of you who are victims or have been around people who have been victimized in one way or another by the gun violence that we are experiencing here and frankly around the country in every major city. No mother, father, daughter, son, wife, significant other, friend, no one should have to experience the trauma that so many co-victims of gun violence are experiencing each day. My office continues to work and fight for you each day. If you need support, please contact our District Attorney's Office CARES line. The number is 215-686-8019. That is 215-686-8019. I want to acknowledge the many community stakeholders, staff and media we have present. We have Council Member Kendra Brooks, who has brought so much wonderful energy to City Council and to elections and to, frankly, the elected officials that I deal with every day. We're delighted that she is here. We have Melanie Nelson, the unstoppable Executive Director of Northwest Victim Services. Both Councilmember Brooks and Melanie Nelson will be saying a few words later. Clayton Johnson, who is President of Men Who Care of Germantown and WCOG. Joseph Budd, Board Member of Men Who Care of Germantown. Mr. Budd will also say a few words. We have Imam Idris Abdul Zahir, Board Chairperson of the Masjidullah, who will be saying a couple words. And we have the Reverend Dr. Kevin R. Johnson, lead pastor of the Dare to Imagine Church, who will also say some words. Mr. ADA Jim Delafiora, who is here, and by the way, at one time was a reporter. Is that correct, Mr. Delafiora?
I was.
Yes, he was. So he understands your pain. He will be speaking about what his unit does. And we also have ADHSA lights available if there are any questions. When we look at the data that we have in terms of gun violence, we'll be updating it weekly as we give these presentations. I can tell you that for the week of January 17th through January the 23rd of 2021, there were 10 homicides and there were 38 non-fatal shootings. 123 cases were opened, meaning charges were brought, cases were started involving guns or gun violence. The median bail set for illegal possession of guns was $100,000, and the median bail set for violent offenses involving a gun was $125,000. You know, I've said it before, and if there are any questions, I'll get into the details, but I'll say it again. The cash bail system does not work. It does not work. The cash bail system fails to keep in that small group of people who present such a danger to society that they should be in custody before trial. And on the other hand, it incarcerates people who are not a danger to the community, but are flat out too broke to pay a low bail. The cash bail system does not work. And unfortunately, we are seeing that in Philadelphia as we move forward. All right. So, without going on forever, let me highlight the private criminal complaint unit for a few minutes. So a lot of people don't know that there is a private criminal complaint unit in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. What it does is somewhat specialized. It considers misdemeanor charges for incidents that involve an accused who is known, identifiable, by a complainant or a victim, where those incidents have occurred outside the presence of police. I won't get into all the details because Mr. Delafiora can do that, but under Pennsylvania law, certain kinds of misdemeanor arrests require a police officer to observe it, or they have to be done in other ways. And private criminal complaints is one of the ways that this is done. It handles the following kinds of misdemeanors: simple assault, terroristic threats, theft under $2,000 with some exceptions, vandalism, criminal mischief, and some other offenses. It serves as a conduit of resources for Philadelphia residents. The private criminal complaint unit has continued to operate during the pandemic, although it does so by appointment only. I would now like to introduce ADA Jim Delafiora, supervisor of the private criminal complaint unit. Jim has always done a wonderful job in this position, and it's not always the easiest position. To be candid, it often involves disputes among people who live on the same block that need to be brought under control in a way that makes sense and that cannot be allowed to just get worse and worse. It sometimes involves people who are making assertions that require some verification. But Jim has always had that even keel, that even-handed approach, and that compassion that is necessary for the position. He joined the DA's office in 2006. Jim is a graduate of Bates College and Villanova University School of Law. Over the last 14 years, Jim Delafiore has routinely sought justice and advocated on behalf of victims of crime, serving in various capacities in the DA office's MC unit, the investigations unit, community relations unit, and the private criminal complaint unit. I truly appreciate his commitment to public service, his professionalism, and his continued dedication to the DA's office. I know that he's going to introduce Michelle Comia-Wolf, but I'll let him do that. And as I already told you, his terrible secret, which is that he used to be a radio and television reporter. Mr. Delafiore.
Thank you, Mr. DA. First, I'd like to introduce, I supervise the private criminal complaint unit, and I would like to take a moment to introduce our prosecution assistant supervisor, Michelle Comia-Wolf. She came with me here today. Michelle, how long have you been with the DA's office?
19 years.
And how long have you been with the private criminal complaint unit?
14.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And just to follow up on the DA's remarks, yes, I used to be a newspaper and radio reporter in Western Pennsylvania, and then I spent 3 years as a producer at Court TV in New York before going to law school at Villanova, interned at the DA's office during law school, and eventually they hired me a few years later in 2006. So what is a private criminal complaint? Well, Pennsylvania law provides that a person who feels that crime has been committed against them, but the police have not arrested the individual or charged them for whatever reason, that person can petition their local district attorney's office to file charges against the accused. Each county in Pennsylvania is allowed to set their own guidelines for how they process and handle private criminal complaints. In Philadelphia, like the DA just told you, our guidelines are they have to be misdemeanor crimes only, where the accused is known to the complainant. The complainant has to know the first and last name of the accused and their address, and the crime happens outside the presence of police officers. Misdemeanors only. So I'd like to just walk you through briefly what a person who needs a private criminal complaint and applies for a private criminal complaint, what they would go through. Let's imagine if you have two neighbors, maybe live next door to each other for a few years. They don't like each other. One day, one neighbor punches the other neighbor. The neighbor who got punched, he's our complainant. He's going to call the police. The police are going to come out. The accused has probably gone into his house by then, so the police are going to talk to the complainant, and they're going to observe probably, yeah, it looks like he got punched in the face, but we didn't see it happen. You know who did it, and you know their address, so we're going to write a police report for you and advise you to go down to the private criminal complaint unit. Call the private criminal complaint unit and inquire about getting a criminal charge that way. When people call us, complainants call us, the first thing we need to ask them is, do you have the DC number from the police report? Every police report has what's called a DC number, so that we can go into the police computer system and electronically pull up the police report and see what the police report says. Sometimes if the police report isn't in the police system yet, we have to call the district and have them fax it to us. But either way, we take a look at what the police report says, and if it looks like an accurate police report that does describe a misdemeanor crime and it is a known doer, then we make an appointment for the individual, for the complainant to come in and apply for a private criminal complaint. When they come in, they'll fill out our paperwork and be interviewed by one of our intake people. We try to just make sure that their story, what they're accusing the other person of, matches up with what they told the police when the incident actually occurred. And if everything seems to match up pretty well, then we will approve a criminal charge. In this case, it would be simple assault against the accused. The complainant will take their approved paperwork a few blocks from our office. We're located at 1425 Arch Street on the 4th floor. They'll take their paperwork from our office over to the municipal court filing window, which is at 1339 Chestnut Street. At the filing window, they'll turn in their approved paperwork, and they'll pay a court filing fee of $39.10. It's a court filing fee. It's not controlled by the DA's office. If the complainant is low income, they can talk to people at the filing window about possibly having part of that fee waived. And once they pay the fee and turn in their paperwork, they get their first court date. The first court date is going to be about 1 month in the future. So the complainant has to go home and wait for court. During that 1 month time, we will attempt personal service on the accused by sending a detective out to try to hand deliver the court notice to the defendant, the accused. We will also attempt certified mail service on the accused and give them their court notice that way. Once the first court listing comes around, at the first court listing, it's in the Criminal Justice Center, the Stout Center for Criminal Justice. And the first listing is presided over by a trial commissioner, not a judge. The trial commissioner asks the complainant, do you want a stay-away order? Complainants usually say, yes, they do. And then the complainant is given the option to mediate the problem away right there in court that day. The court can call in special court mediators to meet with the parties in the dispute in a conference room just off the courtroom and try to negotiate a settlement agreement. And that can include a stay-away order that both parties can live with. If the parties can successfully mediate the problem away, then they sign off on the mediated agreement, walk out of the courthouse that day, and the case is over. There's a heavy emphasis in the private criminal complaint process for mediation, for the parties to try to resolve the problem without having to go actually in court in front of a judge for an actual trial. If the parties cannot resolve the problem through mediation, then the case will end up getting a court date several weeks in the future in an actual municipal court courtroom for a judge to hear the case as a trial. As the DA told you, we see mostly things like simple assaults, criminal mischief, which is vandalism, problems between neighbors or acquaintances or friends who have a falling out, that kind of thing. Certain high levels of like terroristic threats or ongoing problems of harassment where mediation and cease and desist letters haven't worked. We see a lot of situations like that. So hopefully people will not have to ever have to deal with us, because if you do have to deal with us, it means you're having a problem. But if there is a problem, if the police say, hey, look, you've got to take this to the private criminal complaint unit, that's where we are and that's what we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Very much appreciated. So I don't think we should underestimate how important this actually is to have what often turns out to be a mediation process between people who are increasingly combative. We saw a killing around the holidays that originated as a fight over a parking space. You know, long-standing disputes among neighbors, if they're allowed to fester, can have terrible results. So in that sense, I think it serves a very important purpose, in the sense that many of these disputes can be resolved without anyone being convicted, but by getting the courts involved in a way so that stay-away orders calm down a situation. That is certainly desirable, but this is also not a coercive program for people who insist that they need to prosecute their case. That is available, and those cases will progress to a trial. You know, having worn more than one hat in this system, I have seen the success that this program can deliver. Rather than my coming up over and over, I'm going to introduce to all of you the speakers who will be coming forward in sequence. They have such good memories, they will remember their sequence, I have no doubt. First we'll be hearing from, and all of them will be speaking for a couple minutes or so. First we'll be hearing from Councilmember Brooks, we'll be hearing from Melanie Nelson next. Then from Joseph Budd, we'll be hearing from the Imam after that, and from the Reverend. He will be the final of those 5 speakers, and then we'll take questions from the media. Councilmember?
Thanks. Thank you to DA Krasner and the District Attorney's Office for having me here today. I'm honored to be surrounded with community leaders, activists, the clergy, around working on ways to combat gun violence, the crisis that we have here in Philadelphia. My office has been working on issues around gun violence since we've been in office, and I've been committed to this issue prior to even running for office. But we know that everyone right now is going through so much with this COVID pandemic, right? And we know that, you know, issues are easily exacerbated just because we're individually going through tense, hard times. And it's important that we all lend a hand to be the solutions for the communities. And I know that the DA's office has been working around the clock to help create communities there people feel safe and safe around each other. We realize that our communities are hurting, and we need to address the root causes of gun violence, while also being available to de-escalate issues on the ground. because we need to stop the bloodshed. And we need to use the resources like the private criminal complaint unit to resolve disputes, interpersonal issues through mediation rather than incarceration. Being a woman growing up in North Philadelphia, I remember neighborhood fights that fester for years and years, and having to go through conflict resolutions with my neighbors as young people. We're in a different time now. You know, a lot of this stuff has expanded into our adults, and we need to make sure that we provide the resources to keep our communities together. And it means that this means all hands on deck, and all hands on deck immediately. When we realized that last year we had nearly 500 homicides. And for me, daily, at least weekly, my children talk about losing a friend. So right now, we need our young people, we need our elders, we need the church, we need law enforcement to work together to get this message out that there are solutions before it's too late. We need to treat this crisis like the threat it is. It's an epidemic that is traumatizing generations of Black and brown communities. So we have to come together. And we realize this pandemic has separated us, isolated us, and also traumatized us. And it has been difficult for those who have lost work, lost loved ones, and lost their ability to reach out to community support. But now it's time for us to build bridges, to open up the lines of communication, and reach out to those who are suffering. And as we build those connections, we must also start to rebuild our city. We are looking forward to safely reopening schools and other institutions as these cases begin to decline. And we will begin to put the pieces back together in our neighborhoods and our communities together. And I want to commend the work of the District Attorney's Office and the other community leaders here today. Together, we can tackle this gun violence crisis head on. And we got to do it together. Thank you so much, and stay safe.
Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Nelson, and I am the Executive Director for Northwest Victim Services. And we help victims and witnesses of crime in the Northwest section of Philadelphia. All of our services are free. We help with unpaid medical bills, lost time from work, funeral expenses, counseling, relocation, mileage, and we also have free therapy. But for me today, I need to ask you a question. What are you doing to stop gun violence in the city of Philadelphia? We all have to work together. We have so many people in our communities that are hurting. I deal with victims every day that are afraid to testify in court because they think their life will be next. These are issues that we have to deal with. I have seniors who are afraid to testify. I have mothers who have watched their child be murdered right across the street from their house, and they need to be relocated. We all have to work together. The District Attorney's Office, our council people, we have to take back our city. And it starts with one. The power of one starts with you. What are you doing to stop gun violence?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Budd. I'm the president and co-founder of Men Who Care of Germantown Incorporated. I have Clayton Justice, who is our executive director. We are here today on behalf of the DA's office, and we're glad to see all these people coming together about a crisis in our community. I like the passion that my sister had because we all need that passion. We all need that concern because this is an epidemic going on in our communities. And we can't just legislate our way out of it. We can't just arrest our way out of it. We got to deal with the source. And that is what Men Who Care is doing in the schools. We're trying to catch them before they pick up the gun, before they pick up the drugs. So we're in 3 schools, Emlyn, Roosevelt, Martin Luther King High School. We started as a group of guys from the neighborhood that some of us were the problem in the community. And we saw a need in our community, and we said, we're gonna do something about it. Because crime is rampant and drug is rampant, and then we got a pandemic on top of that. So we have decided that we're gonna engage parents, we're gonna engage students, we are gonna engage administration at schools and teachers, because it takes the whole village to raise our children. That has been our theme. If you look at our shirt, it takes a village to raise a child. We've had that theme for the last 3 years because we recognize it's a lot of work to do, and we all need to be passionate about that. So we actually started out cleaning lots in Germantown. We cleaned a lot where once we finished, there was drug vials and everything, the same street we used to hang on when we were younger, and had some of those guys in the community that were selling drugs help us clean the lots. So that is a connection that we have to the community, and we're trying to build those relationships, because without those relationships, they will not trust you. You can set up all the programs you want and try to get those children to come. They ain't coming. That's why we go into schools. We go where they are, and we need the schools to work with us. We need the principals and administrators of those schools to work with the community. We've been trying to get in schools for the longest. Some schools put up roadblocks, to be honest with you. And we're ready to go in and do the work. We also need support from the politicians and funding for stipends